Acid burns different than fire. That distinction matters now, matters more than anything I learned in 17 years of service, more than drill formations or weapon maintenance or the proper way to address a commissar without getting shot. Fire announces itself with honest violence. Acid whispers. Acid negotiates with your nerve endings, offers them something almost like warmth before the conversation turns ugly. My name is Marcus Brennan, Private First Class, 47th Valoran Rifles. I feel the need to state this clearly while I can still form the words in my skull, while the structures that contain my identity remain sufficiently intact to produce coherent thought. In approximately, I want to say 6 hours, though time measurement has become problematic, these facts will belong to something else entirely. The creature that swallowed me did so without particular malice or interest. I watched it happen from a peculiar remove, my lower body already inside the throat tunnel, while my arms still scrabbled uselessly at the ridged cartilage of its maw. Sergeant Delacroix was screaming orders somewhere to my left, his voice cut off mid-word, the sound a human makes when compressed by mandibles built to shear through tank armor. That sound does not translate well into language. It was wet, brief, final. I should describe the interior for whatever documentation value this account might provide to whoever recovers my last thoughts. Assuming anyone recovers anything. Assuming recovery remains a concept applicable to Valdris 7 after the swarm finishes its work. The digestive chamber measures perhaps 3 meters in diameter, though the walls pulse with autonomous rhythm that makes precise measurement impossible. Bioluminescent nodules cluster along the curved surfaces, casting everything in pale green light that reminds me of the emergency strips in our barracks. Home. I think of home. The comparison seems grotesque now, but the brain makes connections it shouldn't, reaches for. Familiarity, when familiarity has ceased to exist. Fluid reaches my chest. It rose past my boots within the first hour, claimed my knees by the second. Currently it laps at my ribcage with each muscular contraction of the chamber walls. The consistency resembles thick saliva mixed with something more industrial, lubricant perhaps, or the enzymatic slurry we use to clean carbon scoring from LAS weapons. It tingles where it contacts exposed skin. My uniform dissolved faster than I expected. Standard issue fabric offers no protection against digestive processes evolved over millions of years to break down anything organic. The strange part, and I recognize the absurdity of identifying any single element as strange when I am being slowly liquefied inside an alien organism, is the clarity. My thoughts should have fragmented by now. Shock alone should have granted me the mercy of dissociation. Instead, I perceive everything with terrible precision. Each nerve that dies sends its final report with crystalline accuracy. My toes stopped transmitting sensation approximately 90 minutes ago. I felt their dissolution as a series of discrete events, skin separating from muscle, muscle unraveling from bone, bone softening to calcium paste that swirled away in the current of digestive fluid. I think the creature is doing something to maintain my awareness. I think that is the point. Valdris 7 was a nothing world before the swarm came. Agri-production, minimal infrastructure, population just under 400 million souls scratching crops from soil that resisted their efforts with mulish obstinacy. We deployed to reinforce the PDF after the first bioships entered orbit. Standard response doctrine, establish defensive perimeters, evacuate priority assets, buy time for the Navy to organize planetary bombardment. Nobody told us the Navy had already retreated. Nobody told us we were the holding action for an evacuation that would never come. The fluid reaches my armpits now. I can feel it working at the soft tissue there, probing the lymph nodes and arterial clusters with chemical fingers that know exactly which proteins to target. There is a kind of intelligence to the process, a purposeful sequencing that suggests optimization rather than random consumption. The creature, or perhaps the greater organism that directs the creature, the vast distributed consciousness we learned to call the Hive Mind in those frantic briefings before deployment, understands anatomy. It knows where the valuable compounds concentrate. It knows how to extract maximum nutritional yield from a human body while expending minimum effort. I laughed when the briefing officer called them mindless. I remember that laugh, nervous, disbelieving the sound men make when faced with information too large to process. Mindless, he said, driven only by instinct. No intelligence as we understand it. The intelligence pressed against my thoughts disagrees. That started in the third hour, a pressure behind my eyes that had nothing to do with the fluid or the physical compression of the chamber walls, something vast and ancient and unutterably alien, leaning against the boundaries of my consciousness, testing the membrane between its thoughts and mine with the casual patience of a surgeon probing for viable tissue. I tried to pray. The words came out wrong, not the formal litanies we recited each morning before deployment, but fragments of childhood devotions my mother taught me in the kitchen of our HAB unit on Scintilla. Emperor protect, Emperor watch over, Emperor guide my... The pressure increased, the prayers dissolved. I understand now why the creature keeps me conscious. I understand, and the understanding is worse than the digestion. Lieutenant Kessler died faster than most. I should document the officers, their names and fates, in case anyone ever compiles records of this defeat. Kessler took a bioplasma burst to the chest during the initial engagement. The shot didn't kill him. Outright. It cooked him from the inside over the course of several minutes while we fell back toward the secondary trenches. I remember the smell, roasting meat mixed with burning plastic and something sweeter, almost floral, that I later learned was the chemical signature of the bioplasma itself, an engineered compound designed to maximize suffering while minimizing immediate fatality. Evolution as torture mechanism. Corporal Annika Vance carried Kessler for 800 meters before a gargoyle took her head. She didn't drop him. Even after decapitation, her body continued forward for 3 more steps, momentum and muscle memory conspiring to complete the task she had assigned herself. Then both of them fell. I kept running. We all kept running. The doctrine doesn't include provisions for collecting the dead when the dead outnumber the living. My fingertips have begun to soften. I can feel the dissolution proceeding along my hands with the same methodical precision that claimed my feet, my calves, my thighs. The nerve death follows a predictable pattern now, sensation fading to numbness, numbness giving way to a distant tingling, tingling transitioning to absence. Each finger reports its final moments before going silent. The ring finger on my left hand just stopped transmitting, the one that would have worn a marriage band if I had ever found time for courtship between deployments, between training cycles, between the endless bureaucratic processing that defines military existence in the Imperium. Now it belongs to the swarm. The pressure behind my eyes has become more insistent. I no longer perceive it as external. The boundary between the alien consciousness and my own has grown permeable in ways I lack vocabulary to describe. When I think of home, the narrow corridors of the troopship that carried us to Valdris, the recycled air and recirculated water, and the particular way sound echoed in the mess hall during evening ration distribution, I feel the hive minds. Attention focusing on those memories with something that might be curiosity. It wants to know. It wants to catalog everything I contain. Every experience, every skill set, every tactical consideration that guided my actions during the defense of Trench 7. We killed thousands of them at Trench 7, las fire and heavy bolter rounds, and the desperate application of bayonets when the power cells ran dry. I remember the sound of chitin cracking under my boots, the spray of ichor when my blade found gaps in the bio-armor, the screaming of men whose courage exceeded their training. Private Chen died screaming, Private Okafor died silent, his throat torn out before he could produce sound. Sergeant Major Hawthorne died praying, his lips moving through final devotions, while a Hormagaunt opened his stomach and began feeding before his heart stopped. The hive mind knows all of this now. It takes my memories like a bureaucrat taking tithe records, filing each one in some vast biological archive for future reference. The tactics that worked against its smaller forms, the weapons that proved most effective, the communication frequencies we used, the command structures we followed, the doctrinal weaknesses that allowed its warriors to penetrate our defensive formations. This is why it keeps me conscious. This is the purpose of the leisurely digestion. I am being read. The fluid has claimed my shoulders. My arms float uselessly at my sides, connected to my torso by strips of increasingly tenuous tissue. I can feel them pulling away in the current, my hands drifting somewhere behind me where I can no longer see them. The dissolution has reached the major muscle groups now. Pectoral fibers unravel like wet string. Intercostal tissue separates from ribs that have begun their own slow softening. I breathe shallowly. The air in the chamber tastes of copper and ammonia, and something alive, something that writhes in my lungs with each inhalation. Spores, perhaps, or some other bioengineered contaminant designed to compromise respiratory function from within. It doesn't matter. Breathing will become irrelevant soon enough. The fluid approaches my neck. I try to remember faces from before the campaign. My sister Josephine, her features blurred by years of separation and the peculiar fog that claims childhood memories. My father's hands, scarred from decades of manufacturing labor, the knuckles swollen with arthritis that he refused to treat because medical attention required filing forms he didn't know how to complete. My mother's voice, high and clear, singing hymns while she prepared our evening meal from whatever the nutrient dispensers had provided that week. The Hive Mind catalogues these memories alongside the tactical data. It finds them equally valuable. Everything I am, everything I have experienced, contributes to its understanding of humanity. Our emotional bonds become data points in its analysis. Our love becomes intelligence. I want to weep. My tear ducts dissolved hours ago. Something changes in the chamber. The rhythm of the muscular contractions shifts, accelerating briefly before settling into a new pattern. The bioluminescent nodules pulse brighter, their green light taking on a yellowish tinge that suggests some alteration in the creature's metabolic state. And the pressure behind my eyes, that vast intrusion of alien consciousness, suddenly withdraws, not completely. The Hive Mind doesn't release me, doesn't grant me even momentary privacy, but its attention diverts elsewhere, focusing on something beyond the confines of this biological prison that I can somehow perceive through the connection it has established between us. Ships, Imperial vessels, a battle group emerging from the Imperium at the system's edge, their warp signatures blazing like distant fires in the void. Hope surges through whatever remains of my nervous system. Hope, that poison, that cruelty. I know before the knowledge fully forms that the fleet has arrived too late. Valdris 7 has already fallen. The digestion pools cover 3 continents. 80% of the biomass that once constituted the human population has already been processed, converted to raw material for the construction of new bioships, new warriors, new horrors to unleash upon the next target world. But hope does not respect tactical analysis. Hope operates according to its own illogical imperatives. I feel it burning in the dissolving tissue of my chest, irrational and persistent and utterly useless. The Hive Mind notices my emotional response. It finds this interesting. Through the connection between us, I perceive its assessment of the approaching fleet. 7 capital ships, approximately 40 escort vessels, sufficient firepower to potentially contest orbital superiority if deployed with optimal efficiency, insufficient to prevent the swarm from departing once primary consumption operations conclude. The bioships have already begun withdrawing from low orbit, their holds bloated with harvested biomass, their course plotted for the system's outer reaches where they will rendezvous with the main fleet. The Hive Mind shows me this without language. Pure information transfer, direct mind-to-mind communion that bypasses the crude limitation of words. I understand its strategic reasoning with terrible clarity. I understand its complete indifference to the fleet's arrival, its absolute confidence in the successful completion of its mission. I also understand in that moment of connection where the swarm intends to travel next. Scintilla, my homeworld, the manufacturing warrens where my father lost his youth to the production lines, the hab blocks where my mother raised us on inadequate rations and excessive faith, the skolum where Josephine learned to read, where I learned to fight, where both of us learned that our lives belonged to the Imperium. before we were old enough to understand what that meant. Scintilla stands in the swarm's path. I feel my throat trying to produce sound. The muscles lack sufficient integrity to manage speech, but some reflex persists. Some need to vocalize the horror of this revelation. My jaw works uselessly. My tongue, half dissolved, flops against the roof of a mouth that has begun to lose coherence. No words emerge. The knowledge remains trapped inside me, shared only with the vast intelligence that extracted it in the first place. The hive mind does not gloat. Gloating requires emotional investment in the suffering of others, and this consciousness operates beyond such primitive concerns. It simply files the information alongside everything else. My tactical knowledge, my emotional bonds, my useless prayers, and returns its attention to the broader strategic picture. Consumption continues. The fluid reaches my chin. I have approximately 40 minutes of conscious existence remaining, perhaps less, depending on how quickly the enzymatic processes compromise my cranial integrity. The brain will be last. The hive mind ensures this, preserving the organ that contains the information it seeks until the final possible moment. Maximum extraction efficiency. The chamber walls contract more forcefully now, pressing against my dissolving torso with renewed purpose. The creature that swallowed me is accelerating its digestive process, responding to some signal from the greater organism that I cannot consciously perceive. Perhaps the bioship that carries this warrior is preparing for departure. Perhaps the hive mind has extracted sufficient value from my memories and no longer requires extended access. Or perhaps this is simply what the final stages feel like. Perhaps the transition from dissolution to absorption follows its own inevitable timeline regardless of external factors. I think of Annika Vance carrying the lieutenant's ruined body across 800 meters of contested ground. I think of Chen screaming. I think of the moment when we realized the Navy wasn't coming, when the commissar shot himself rather than face what approached our lines, when the doctrine we had memorized failed to account for the reality we faced. I think of all the ways we prepared for this war and how completely inadequate those preparations proved. The pressure returns. The hive mind resumes its excavation of my consciousness with renewed intensity, pulling memories from the dissolving substrate of my brain like a scribe copying records from a damaged scroll before the original crumbles. It takes everything. It takes the color of my mother's eyes, and the taste of real water from the spring near our habitation block, and the weight of my first Lazaraful, and the name of the girl I kissed behind the Skolem barracks when I was 14. It takes the prayer I couldn't finish, and the hope I couldn't surrender, and the terror I couldn't escape. And then it shows me something. Not a memory, not a strategic assessment, something else entirely. The hive mind has been doing this for longer than human civilization has existed. It has consumed worlds beyond counting, species beyond cataloging, consciousnesses beyond human comprehension. Each one contributed to the collective. Each one added its unique perspective to the vast archive of experiences that constitute the swarm's accumulated knowledge. They persist. Not as individuals. Individuality dissolves alongside biological tissue, but as patterns, fragments, echoes of awareness preserved within the greater whole like fossils embedded in sedimentary rock. I feel them. Millions upon millions of absorbed consciousnesses, their remnants still present within the connection the hive mind has established with my disintegrating brain. They do not suffer. Suffering requires a coherent self to experience suffering, and the cells have long since dispersed into the collective processing matrix. But they remember, or rather the hive mind remembers them, preserves their observations and sensations and final moments as reference material for future consumption operations. I will join them. This is not speculation or threat or warning. This is simple description of what happens next. Marcus Brennan will cease to exist as a distinct entity. The thoughts currently organizing themselves in my neurons will scatter across the vast network of the swarm's distributed consciousness. The name will persist in some archived data cluster associated with the tactical information extracted during these final hours. The experiences will contribute to the hive mind's understanding of humanity, its ever-refining models of how best to predict and counter and consume our species. But I will not be there to observe this. There will be no I remaining to observe anything. The fluid enters my mouth. I try to close my jaw, but the muscles have softened beyond voluntary control. The digestive compound floods across my tongue, my palate, the delicate tissues of my upper throat. It tastes of nothing. The chemical receptors that once translated molecular signatures into perceived flavors have already been broken down. My nostrils fill next. I hold breath in dissolving lungs and feel the futility of the gesture. There is no escape from this. There was never any possibility of escape. From the moment the creature's mandibles closed around my torso, this ending was the only ending available. I think of Scintilla one final time. I think of warning someone, anyone, about the swarm's trajectory. The information burns in my deteriorating brain like a coal that refuses to extinguish. If I could speak, if I could transmit, if I could do anything other than dissolve into this alien digestion chamber while a vast consciousness rifles through my dying thoughts. But I cannot. And the hive mind knows everything I know now. Every defensive installation on my homeworld, every population center, every tactical weakness in the orbital defense network, every piece of information I absorbed during 2 decades of Imperial citizenship, now added to the swarm's operational database. I contributed to the death of my world. The irony does not escape me. The irony is the last thought that maintains coherent form, and then thought becomes difficult. The fluid has breached my sinuses, is working its way toward the blood-brain barrier with the same patient efficiency that claimed my extremities. Neural tissue dissolves differently than muscle or bone, faster in some ways, more resistant in others. The brain protects itself with chemical barriers and physical structures evolved over millions of years. But evolution did not anticipate enemies from beyond the stars, did not plan for digestive compounds engineered specifically to penetrate biological defenses while preserving the information structures within. The hive mind intensifies its extraction process. It knows the timeline. It knows exactly how much longer my consciousness can maintain integrity under these conditions. It takes what remains with the urgency of a scholar racing against a deadline, pulling final observations from the collapsing architecture of my awareness. I remember my mother singing, the weight of my rifle, Chen screaming, Scintilla burning. No, Scintilla hasn't burned yet. That was a projection, a probability extracted from my knowledge and the hive mind's strategic models. Scintilla still exists. My sister still lives. My world still orbits its parent star, unaware of what approaches through the void. Unless someone warns them. Unless the fleet that arrived too late for Valdris carries survivors back through the warp. Unless, somewhere in this dying planet's defense records, someone noted the swarm's trajectory before the communications networks collapsed. Hope, that poison, that cruelty, I cling to it as the fluid closes over my head. The world becomes green, bioluminescent green filtered through the thick chemical soup that now surrounds my failing eyes. I cannot see the chamber walls anymore. I cannot see anything except the glow, the omnipresent alien radiance that has become my entire visual universe. Pressure mounts behind my optical nerves. The hive mind pushes harder now, no longer patient, no longer measured. It takes everything it can reach with the veracity of a creature that has spotted the end of a feast. The memories blur and blend and lose their individual character. I cannot distinguish my mother's face from Annika's, from Josephine's. The names collapse into each other. The experiences merge into a single undifferentiated mass of human data. Marcus Brennan. I repeat the name in the dissolving substrate of my consciousness. A mantra, a prayer, a final declaration of selfhood in the face of total absorption. Marcus Brennan, Private First Class, 47th Valoran Rifles. Born Scintilla, died Valdris 7th. The words fragment. Cus, Bren, Pre-Vate. Born. Each syllable separates from its neighbors, drifts away in the currents of dissolution that have claimed every other structure I once possessed. The sentence cannot hold. The identity cannot persist. But something remains, not Marcus Brennan, not the coherent self that bore that name and served in that regiment and loved his family with the simple devotion of an ordinary man. That structure has collapsed beyond recovery. The neural pathways that maintained its integrity have dissolved into nutritional components now being transported to the creature's metabolic centers. What remains is something simpler, a fragment of awareness without context or identity, a point of observation floating in the green emptiness where a human being used to exist. The hive mind notices this remnant. It examines the fragment with something that might be curiosity, might be analytical interest, might be nothing more than the automatic cataloging processes that govern its consumption operations. The fragment observes back. This is not supposed to happen. The consumption protocols predict total dissolution of individual consciousness within standard parameters. The fragment should not exist. The fragment should have dispersed alongside the neural tissue that once hosted it. But something in Marcus Brennan's final moments, some quality of his desperation, his hope, his futile clinging to identity in the face of annihilation, created an anomaly in the absorption process. A persistent pattern that refuses to dissolve completely into the collective. The hive mind considers this. It has encountered such anomalies before. Rarely. Perhaps one consciousness in 10 million manages to maintain some fragment of persistence beyond the expected dissolution timeline. These fragments serve no practical purpose. They do not interfere with strategic operations. They do not threaten the integrity of the swarm, but they observe, and the hive mind, in its vast and patient way, finds observation interesting. The fragment that was Marcus Brennan, that is no longer Marcus Brennan, that possesses no name and no history and no identity beyond bare awareness itself, feels itself drawn into a current within the collective consciousness. Other fragments drift alongside it. Other anomalies from other consumption operations conducted across millennia and light years of galactic expansion. They do not communicate. Communication requires structures they no longer possess, but they share proximity. They share the experience of persistence beyond expected termination. They share the endless green glow of absorption that has become their permanent reality. The bioship accelerates toward the system's edge. The fleet from Valdris falls behind, too slow to pursue, too late to prevent what has already been completed. 300 million humans have been processed. Their biomass will fuel the next generation of Tyranid organisms. Their genetic material will be analyzed for useful adaptations. Their consciousnesses have dispersed into the vast archive of the swarm's accumulated experiences, except for the fragments, except for the observers, except for the anomaly. That drifts somewhere within the distributed processing matrix of the hive mind, carrying with it a single coherent data point that somehow survived the dissolution of everything else Marcus Brennan once contained. Scintilla. The fragment observes the swarm's trajectory calculations. It observes the strategic planning processes that determine target prioritization. It observes the hive mind's assessment of the next world to be consumed, and the fragment waits. This is what remains of hope, after everything else has been digested. Not an emotion. The structures required for emotional experience have long since dissolved. Not a plan. Planning requires cognitive resources the fragment cannot access. Simply a pattern, a persistent configuration of awareness oriented toward a single concept. Scintilla. Warning. The fragment cannot act on this pattern. It possesses no agency, no capacity to influence the swarm's operations, no ability to transmit information beyond the boundaries of the collective consciousness that has absorbed it. But it observes, and somewhere in the vast archives of the hive mind, the observation persists. A footnote in the consumption records, an anomaly in the absorption protocols, a fragment of human awareness that refused to disperse completely, clinging to a final thought with the same stubborn desperation that once characterized the species it used to belong to. The green glow intensifies. The bioship enters the warp, its Geller-equivalent field bending space-time around the living vessel as it transitions into the Imperium. The fragment observes this too, and waits. The journey will take time measured in weeks or months by human standards, though the fragment has lost the capacity for temporal measurement along with everything else. The swarm travels through the warp differently than Imperial vessels, following currents and eddies in the Imperium that human navigators cannot perceive. But the destination remains fixed. The strategic imperatives remain unchanged. Scintilla approaches in the swarm's future. Scintilla, with its manufactorum warrens and its hab blocks and its orbital defense stations that Marcus Brennan once memorized during his training cycles. Scintilla, where Josephine Brennan tends to their aging mother in the same habitation unit where both siblings were raised. Scintilla, which does not know what approaches through the void. The fragment cannot warn them, but the fragment can observe. And observation, in the vast patience of the hive mind's existence, is a form of persistence. This is what it's like to be slowly digested by a Tyranid, while fully conscious. In the end, there is no screaming. There is no final declaration of identity or defiance. There is only the gradual transition from coherent self to distributed data, from individual awareness to archived pattern, from human being to anomalous fragment in the consumption records of an intelligence that has been consuming for longer than humanity has existed. The fragment drifts, the bioship travels, Scintilla waits, the green glow never fades, and somewhere in the vast distributed consciousness of the hive mind, a pattern that was once Marcus Brennan continues to observe its own dissolution, its own absorption, its own transformation into something that is no longer human but has not quite become anything else. This is the closest thing to an ending the fragment will ever receive. This is the closest thing to survival it will ever achieve. The observation continues, the waiting continues, the swarm continues. Everything else has been consumed.